people who are choosing to ignore it as well, but a lot are blind. And that's what I really feel ties into a question coming up in like, what is my place as a colonial individual teaching Indigenous curriculum, and we'll get into that later. But like Termination Night is just like how colonization was recreated.
What were they doing exactly that made you think that they were recreating colonization?
So yeah, the comparisons are drawn pretty clearly in the song, and I'll bring them up for you again. So no, that's not true. The song I'm still working on, but the lyrics are finished, the instruments are finished. I just gotta put it together. But I'll draw it out now because Gwen hasn't heard it yet.
So now,
wait. Oh yeah, I'll explain it to you. So like the comparisons you have is like, you have like colonizers came to Turtle Island, gave it a name. Like maybe Indigenous folks had named the entire continent itself. They didn't think so much in a land ownership format as colonizers did, but in some format, like this was a certain area, like these people lived here, like this is where they lived and fed their people, like it was just like, but they brought the name and they called it various things, the Americas, Canada, United States of America, various things, New England and all that jazz, all that stuff. And the students named it Eskimo Island, and not only did they rename the island, they also used possibly an offensive term. So it's just like, oh geez, a lot of learning has to be done, or if they've already chosen their choice, knowing the implications of their behavior, a lot of like what do you do to those people who are just completely ignorant and stuff? But I don't know. There's choices. So yeah, that's one of the examples, and there's a few more within the song.
So, now, Donan, how do you feel about Indigenous knowledge being taught within a colonial system?
There's residential schools. There's today's schools of today. There's differences, right? And they're both colonial, but one's less violent. So it's just like the schools of today, you could probably teach a Native Studies course in high school or incorporate into the PJ curriculum, and you probably will get the message across that something terrible happened. You could probably get the message across that the colonial system's pretty violent. You can probably get the message across about how the environment is being pillaged and destroyed, and how there's different approaches to treat it that will benefit everything. And you won't get harassed by administration. Like there definitely is allowance for that. Now, on the other hand, I use the word allowance, right? Like they still have complete power over what you teach. Like they design the curriculum, they design the overall expectations, they design the specific expectations. So it's just like, what are you working with? What choices do you have? What choices can you not make without losing your job or getting yelled at, getting harassed, which happens quite often. Be it for what you're teaching or who you are, but there's definitely a little bit of harassment, or a lot, depending on context. But back to the point is that colonial people are in charge of the colonial education system, and we still see many racist colonial acts being committed within our government, and it is a government funded and owned system. So it's just like, what's your line? Do you not mind giving away power for a lot of resources and a lot of access to students? Do you want to have full power but probably less resources and probably less students, depending on the community? Less students is actually pretty good sometimes. But, where are the taxpayers' dollars going? Where is everyone's time and effort going into this ridiculous education system? So I guess my opinion is, it really depends on what the teacher's opinion is. If you want to teach within the colonial system, Indigenous knowledge, if you want to teach Indigenous knowledge within the colonial system, like, how much power do you want to give away? And if you don't, then you obviously want to maintain full control of what's being taught. That's weirdly put, but you also you just don't want to be told to censor certain things that need to be discussed. So yeah.
And how do you feel about a colonial individual teaching courses that contain Indigenous knowledge? I suppose you probably just already answered that in a way.
I got some more to elaborate on that.
Okay.
Yeah. As a colonial individual, me teaching Indigenous knowledge, this gets back to Termination Night. So, I'm white, privileged. Where am I best suited in the act of decolonization? Like where can I be most effective while also, be most effective on my personal growth? I guess it's varied, actually, spending time in various places, but one place I do find effective is being around other people like me, white, privileged, and bringing a little bit of awareness to them. Be it my friends, family, people who already know me, not through politics or not through school, but just like other lives, and just bringing the light that they might not know. And it's really awesome that the attention they give me, and if they consent to hearing a bit about this knowledge that I've learned, it's quite effective. And then it gets to, where else can I go? I can go teach in the school that I was brought up in, teach a course that never existed there when I was going there. So it's like, me teaching Indigenous knowledge would mostly be concerned with my role in how I affected Indigenous knowledge and what my part of it is. And my part of Indigenous knowledge is colonization. What part of it is part of me? And so I feel I have lots of rights to talk about how my people did terrible things, So it's just I can talk a lot about what happened, the reality of it and how it impacts today's society. And then when it comes to specifics about Indigenous culture, maybe I can tip my toes in, but I think in order to really retain it, you have to be part of the culture, and that's not really mine. So in terms of what I'm teaching, I'm going to reference to a lot of Indigenous authors and a lot of media that's designed by Indigenous individuals and a lot of guest speakers. Not the entire course. I can still do a lot of work with my own knowledge and presence, but there's some things that I cannot teach. There's some things that I cannot teach that I don't feel comfortable teaching. for the very reason of it not being part of my culture. So that's how I feel as a colonial individual teaching Indigenous knowledge, is to mainly stick to the parts that are part of me and tiptoeing in parts I feel comfortable in, but using other sources of people and media for the rest.
And what do you think of the course in terms of preparation for the teaching field?
So yeah, this is Nicole's course. I feel it was designed, like, in terms of like what she taught us during the day. It was very much geared towards, like, the specific activities were very much geared towards the primary junior grades. So, and I'll be doing high school, right? So it's just like, what could I apply from that course? And some of the activities you could manipulate for students who are older. So it's relatively applicable, not as applicable as if I was taking PJ, primary junior, but teaching that. But there's a lot of really, like, knowledge just embedded, like, she was doing activities, right, that teach Indigenous knowledge, but she was also teaching us how to teach those activities. But the actual knowledge within the activity was very useful to me. Like, she said, go sit still for 2.5 hours, and I was like, I haven't done that before. Like, I've gone to bed for many hours. I've actually played video games and sat still for like a number of hours, but not actually had like an unoccupied mind. I had planned on doing like these week excursions to like meditation places, but I never followed through. So like I hadn't even done 2.5 hours before, so I was like, sweet. And that was a lot of fun. Like, no doing anything, just sitting. And
What sort of knowledge did you gain from that experience?
it's a great question. I'm gonna drink some water before I answer that. Oh, man. So, this experience was very, I definitely consider myself to be a relatively calm person, but it was a good test. And, I sat in my tent for 2.5 hours and like sat upright, just sitting there, and things came to mind, things drifted away. What I gained from it, during, just would have been an ability to just like stop and sit within my own self. And it really applied later in life. I've been able to sit still for like 40-minute periods during the day. Like after I eat a meal, I just sit there. After a really stressful work session, I just, might lie down, not pass out, but I'll just sit there, or lie there. I just definitely have slowed down a lot ever since that. Just because I know I can last for 2.5 hours, I can definitely sit still for 10 minutes, But in terms of me going beyond 2.5 hours, or recreating that event, I haven't done that yet. But it's just really helped slow me down, which is something I desire in this crazy whirlwind of capitalism. So yeah.
And so, Donan,